morning.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. I want to introduce you to Karen McCarthy. She is a Leadville resident, lives up on 6th Street near the intermediate high schools, and is a incredibly skilled and knowledgeable immigration attorney that we're lucky to have in our community. She has an office down in Summit, and I think still in the Front Range as well, and often uses our office when we have folks locally, so we don't have to take them down the hill to meet with her and stuff. But I thought it might be productive for her to come and have just a general conversation with you, and try to answer what questions you might have about the impact of the new administration's immigration policies and some of the things they're trying to implement, and potentially what our options or resources might be for that. Mm-hmm. So, Karen, I'm going to let you take it. So we've got Commissioner Matt Bullock, Commissioner Andrew Lee, who's the chair of the BOCC, and Commissioner Elsa Tharp. Karen McCarthy.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Well, thank you for inviting me this morning, and thank you for the very kind introduction, Chris. So I think Chris just very nicely summed up what I do, but to give you a little bit more detail, I've been living in Leadville since 2018. Before that, I lived in Summit for many, many years before it got too expensive a little bit. And my husband's also a long-time Leadville resident. And I've been practicing law since 2009, primarily immigration law. I've been fortunate enough to work all over Colorado with a lot of different communities, but mainly rural. We don't have a ton of immigration attorneys outside of the metro area. So I've been really fortunate to help a lot of people. I also have background clerking for the immigration court and also providing a lot of community presentations on Know Your Rights over the years. So the immigration landscape has changed. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of deportations under multiple administrations. So I think no matter what your political leanings are, we can probably all agree that there's been some pretty scary announcements over the last couple of weeks about detaining people without any eligibility for bonds, even if they're not criminals, which really goes against the American justice system and something called habeas corpus. If you're interested, it's called the Lake and Riley Act that was just passed, which makes something as minimal as shoplifting a crime that could make somebody ineligible for an immigration bond. So I'm here to answer questions. My husband's spinning a little bit over the past few weeks with some executive orders that may be enforceable, may not be enforceable. There's been a lot of questions coming to me from churches, from schools, about what we can and can't do if immigration enforcement oversteps. Or, quite frankly, people have come to me and said, what will I get in trouble for if I want to protect my friends or my neighbor? So, there's definitely been some scare tactics, I think, being used by the current federal government. I think this is a time where we can all come together and stick together and do the right thing.
So Karen, and just to bring Commissioner up to speed, I talked a little bit about this. In this regard, we are fortunate to live in Colorado because the Colorado legislature has taken some action to try to protect our immigrant residents and such like that, in terms of making it so that, for example, there's a statute that does not permit them to come in to the courtrooms and such like that if they know somebody's appearing for a court, to come in and arrest them for a civil immigration detention order type of thing. But I don't know if that's kind of, because I know, and Karen's also been in communication with Cape Water School District to work on those kind of spaces and such as well. But I think for our purposes here, just more of what you touched on of what we can and can't do. If, for example, we have public meetings here, and the ability for federal immigration officials to come into the courthouse, to arrest people if they think they're here and such like that. So any advice or guidance or whatever you can give in terms of what we can do in our public spaces, because it's not just this courthouse, but also other facilities that the county owns. And another issue that's come up that I chatted with you briefly about too is if there's any way we can reassure our immigrant constituents about the ability to still apply for benefits and, that type of situation. Because I think a lot of it is born out of the fear of not wanting their names on a certain list or being afraid to come into public spaces that ICE might be camping out and waiting to pick them up and such like that. So any comments or questions you have on that? And then mostly Karen's here to answer what questions, if she can, that y'all have specifically as well. I want to make this as productive as possible for y'all.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So public spaces are open to entries by law enforcement agents. Essentially anyone can come in to something like a restaurant or a shop that's open to the public. But the owner of that establishment does have rights. They can ask to speak to the ICE agent and see any warrants they may have or ask about who they're looking for. Chris is absolutely right. There are some restrictions around actual courthouses because we want people to go to their legal proceedings, whether it's family law court, criminal court, civil actions. ICE has found ways to get around that, such as waiting outside of the courthouse. That's been happening quite a bit in Jeffco, even before January. Knowing when somebody has a meeting with a probation officer is another way they can wait outside of a building to try to intercept an individual that they're looking for. But getting back to asking for paperwork, we have two different types of warrants. An actual judicial warrant is a traditional warrant when somebody gets into trouble and a judge reviews, an incident report or, a report from a law enforcement agency and actually signs off on them being able to detain this person for violating law. An immigration warrant's a little bit different and carries a lot less weight. And that's a piece of paper issued by an immigration officer. It doesn't go before a judge. So a judicial warrant is something that we do have to really pay attention to, whereas a piece of paper signed by an immigration agent does not carry the same weight. So talking about public spaces, just so you all know, the Fourth Amendment search and seizure laws apply to private spaces. So your home, sometimes your vehicle in certain instances. We spent about a whole semester in law school going over the case law, so I won't get into the nitty-gritty, but essentially you do not have to open the door to anybody without a judicial warrant if you're in a private space. And again, a judicial warrant has that probable cause element. So usually somebody really did something wrong, right? If we have that, a judge saying, yes, this person is a danger to the community.
What about the other warrant? What are the guidelines around, what did you call the other warrant? The one signed by just an immigration official?
That's a civil detention.
Civil
So
detention.
it's civil versus, in those instances, a warrant issued by a judicial officer
Right.
is in relation to criminal activities.
Right, but what's when you talk about carries different weight, like where does the other warrant have its weight?
Immigration agents will sometimes show an immigration warrant to try to gain access to a private household. And we actually have examples of each one. If you'd like, I can email it out.
I've got it, your
I got
draft, if that'd be helpful, if I can email it to the BOCC room, perhaps, and we can get it up on the screen so you can actually, and that way you can actually see it. Bear with me one second.
So there's essentially no judicial review for the immigration warrant. Yes, they might be looking for somebody who has an old removal order, or they may have reason to believe overstayed a visa, things along those lines, but it's not reviewed by an actual sitting judge on the bench.
but the warrant still like gives them warrant to arrest someone. It just doesn't give you access to private residence.
That's a great question. So, yes, if ICE comes into our community specifically looking for somebody, they work with the Department of Homeland Security. They're going to have a good idea of where that person lives, maybe where they work. A lot of this information we put on immigration applications, especially if somebody comes into the country and is paroled, for example, you have to give the immigration office a good address of where you're going to be living. And a lot of times arrests and detentions are made even without any paperwork. Why it's so important to get out and educate people, everybody, not just undocumented immigrants. You know, everyone should know this information, I think, is you do not have to talk to an immigration officer. They can be pretty pushy, you know, that's their job, they'll ask where you're born. You know, they might ask your kids where were your parents born, that's been happening quite a bit, and you know, again, without the judicial warrant, you do not have to answer those questions. You can say, hey, you know, I'd like to talk to my lawyer, or am I free to leave? And those are the magic words. Where anything said after that, we may be able to not have used as evidence before an immigration court later on.
I don't wanna be the time hog here, but I have so many questions.
Go for it.
That's okay.
We'll try to get this to come through and then we can show you the graph, the difference between the judicial and the immigration warrants.
Do you think the safe status that Colorado employees here, through the laws that have been passed, do you think it is, the balance is like it does more of an effective job of protecting Colorado undocumented residents versus the cons of it like putting us under a microscope? Like, do you think at a federal level, they're like, we're going after these guys first because we know they, you know, this either but through a personal beef with the state itself or because they know people are kind of seeking shelter here, a myriad of reasons, but what do you think on that?
That's an excellent question, and I wish I knew for sure what the future holds. Certainly Aurora has been in the news quite a bit.
Right,
And I've heard rumors that there was a raid in Aurora this morning. I haven't confirmed them.
that apartment complex is shut down. So it's kind of like the media drives, you know, perception becomes the reality and we're kind of stuck with this, this world of like what people are seeing on the screen becomes what's real, even though when you get into the nitty gritty of it, things get a lot different once you're in the saddle.
Exactly, and the media plays a huge role in this. And you know, with any politician or leader, they want to please their base, they want to do what they said they would do during the election. So whether these raids or sweeps are going to continue indefinitely, I sure hope not. But yes, I think because Aurora was in the news, regarding allegations about large groups of gang members and criminal activity, that certainly drew a spotlight on that part of our state, for the federal government. And, you know, it's a fine line. I've been seeing across the country law enforcement agencies like sheriff's offices, police departments, publishing really powerful statements saying we're here to enforce our criminal laws, our state's laws, and we're not going to be working with ICE, so you can come to us. Don't be afraid to call us when you're a victim of a crime. Which thankfully now we still have some protections for undocumented immigrants of crimes, because in the past when I first started practicing, people were scared to call the police if they were a victim of domestic violence because they thought they might run their immigration status through the system. So we worked really hard to try to win that trust back, and I mean mainly our amazing local law enforcement agencies have really tried to build that trust. So I think we can say that we're not here to support, ICE corrections in our communities. I know some people wanted to officially call Lake County a sanctuary county. And that got some pushback, and you know, some of the voices had, I think, some validity that they didn't wanna paint, you know, a target on our backs if that was picked up by the news. So again, at this point, I think the best thing we can do is educate people and make sure that sanity prevails. I think everyone living in Colorado can agree that yes, we want to get drug traffickers, human traffickers, violent criminals off our streets, regardless of immigration status. Personally, if somebody is an aggravated felon or even dabbles in possession of narcotics, I can't help them. You know, these people are not being released back in our communities. Typically those people are and always have been automatically deported. So it's a real gray area. I know the media likes to put everything in black and white, depending on which news outlet you're following, but there's so many people that are just here working hard, raising their kids, you know, maybe in the middle of getting their papers, but until we get their papers, it's a scary situation.
What does what does a typical case for you look like, and what would typically define a success for you? Can you tell us a little bit about, and then I'll give it back to you.
I need my time hogging.
That's a really good question, and I wish I had a short answer, but we work with so many different types of immigration cases. There's family-based and employment-based as big categories. Most of the people that are already living in the United States may not be eligible to have an employer sponsor them if they've already been here without some legal status for a period of time. So I'd say the majority of our cases fall under the family-based category, where you may, for example, enter the United States with a visa and then stay and get married to a US citizen. That's usually the fastest route. But if you have any criminal history or multiple entries, you know, that might not be an option. Again, our laws are really strict. Having a 21-year-old or older child who is a US citizen, that person can petition for a parent. But again, our immigration offices look at the parents' eligibility aside from that, so not everybody is eligible just because they have a kid here. Also, sometimes we have a situation where US citizen or resident parents can apply for a child. Siblings can too, but sometimes there's a 20+ year waiting period, depending on which country you're from. We also assist survivors of crimes with U visas. That's where you work with typically the sheriff's office or police department to bring justice to your perpetrator. So there's some extra protections for people who come forward to work with law enforcement agencies. Same thing with trafficking visas. You'd be surprised that actually comes up quite a bit with some, you know, in any, I guess, resort area. Sometimes there are violations and employment abuses to the point where you can apply for an employment trafficking visa for somebody. We also work with children who are eligible for special immigrant juvenile status, and that's where our judges upstairs help us out quite a bit, because we have to get a custody order first from a state court showing that the child only has one parent or guardian in the United States and it's too dangerous for them to go back to their home country. A lot of people don't know about that option. But as of right now, it is still an option. So if there are any children in our community under the age of 21 who don't have both parents here, we can always evaluate their case to see if they're eligible for that.
Do you work with, sorry, just real quick
No,
follow-up.
go ahead.
And we also do asylum cases.
Do you work with the school district to help make sure that people are informed about this? Like, how do you educate people on how are you educating people on their rights, especially when it comes to like children?
Yeah, absolutely. So we try to do community events as much as possible. And you know, from Glenwood to Eagle to Summit and Lake. We also put information on our website and on our business Facebook page as
Yeah.
much as possible to try to reach an even larger audience.
Thanks.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, I wish we could do more. We do a lot of word of mouth. Which is good because if somebody's child is able to become a lawful permanent resident through this process, which takes years.
Yeah.
It's not like I snap my fingers and get a green card. Usually they'll tell their other friends and family members, and we've seen people trickle into our office once word gets out that we've helped somebody else.
Awesome.
And right now, I think there's probably a bit of a perceived obstacle to having too many community events because, you know, open public events and stuff
Yeah.
like that for fear that
Yeah.
it could put them at risk.
Yeah, which is why we canceled the community,
Yeah, I know, I
One,
saw that too.
which is legit.
You know, and I do have, like, to be clear, like, I have a rough idea of the answers to most of these, I just want like a professional to answer this and put it into words so that I can better communicate a lot of this stuff to like concerned members in the community who might have misconceptions or be misinformed on things. And, you know, next up, was like, you know, the Trump administration claimed they were gonna start with violent criminals. And in your view, has that been true or false? And if we're not sure, why are the stats so hard to find on that kind of stuff?
So, with the Lake and Riley Act I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, that actually opened the door to denying immigration bond to anyone who's even been arrested of a crime. So, if they're innocent, they could still get deported while their criminal case is pending, which is extremely unfortunate and alarming. But that's a great question. So I am on several listservs for immigration lawyers nationally and in Colorado. And I can tell you that it seems that the federal government is trying to boost its numbers of detentions. So it's my understanding they've been detaining a lot more people other than violent criminals. Just to give you a quick example, a very good friend of mine sent me a video this week of her family member being stopped in his car. He did not roll down his window right away, so ICE broke his window, detained him, and he has status, so they eventually let him go. But they didn't charge him with anything, not speeding, not swerving.
They charged him with a broken window, that he's gotta pay for.
Right, so he wasn't too
Here's a
happy
ticket
about
for that
that.
broken window.
We have been receiving reports from around the country that individuals are being detained with no new criminal history. So for example, they have status now, but they may have had an old charge from 10 years ago. I'm not sure why they're popping up on ICE's radar. I can't tell you why these people are being detained other than, again, potentially to say, well, we arrested 100,000 people this month. We put them in, in our case, it's GEO down in Aurora. That's the Immigration Detention Center. I'm hearing that people are coming in and then being released pretty quickly. If they have status or an application pending, and a lot of these folks do have asylum applications pending, which take years to adjudicate. Our system is incredibly backlogged.
Is there cases where, and this one hits home for me a little bit because my wife and daughter are tribal members, but are there cases where Native Americans are being detained and mistakenly and arrested just because they think they're undocumented immigrants?
Not to my knowledge, specifically, I don't believe ICE can go onto reservations. I've had lots of native clients from Mexico and Central America. And ICE does make mistakes. They have arrested US citizens that may be from, another descent of another country or speaking a different language, but grew up here. So yeah, unfortunately, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up happening.
Okay, it could be like a misleading headline that's like tribal members or natives are being detained and they are referring to native tribal Mexican nationals. Possibly.
Or it could be, and I know I've seen some of that too, kind of in Mexico where they're presumed to be Latinx versus native tribal members.
Okay.
I mean, kids of color, of
Yeah.
all colors are afraid
Yes.
because of mistakes happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright, I'll have to dig into that one a little more, cause I think the headline that I scanned past while I was in between stuff was native deported, I think it was what they said they were, so that I gotta figure out more about that one and maybe bounce that back off you guys and see what, just so I can, when people are like, oh, they're just going after violent, it's like, no, they're making mistakes and deporting, the wrong people. So, what do you?
Well, I can say if anyone you know is concerned, you can take a photo of your birth certificate if you're born in the US, just to have on your phone, just in case. I hate to say it, but people are doing that. People who have naturalized, even 20 years ago are starting to carry around their certificate of US naturalization, just in case they get pulled over.
Yeah. It is. This is kind of a tricky one for me, and I didn't know how to word this the best, but who and how, who and or how, I guess, is like in a administrative position and differentiating between the so-called habitual criminal offenders versus like the undocumented immigrants in our community who we like rely on, who are like, without them, we have businesses that can't operate, we have, like the integral parts of our community, especially this community. There's, from restaurants to housekeeping to construction, and not to like pigeonhole everyone into those, but like just to name a few, like those, the perceived ideal of a good immigrant, I guess, which is hard for me to wrap my head around. But like who's at a federal level or, within ICE, is there someone who's like, oh, there's a good one, there's a bad one, get them out of here, how does the process unfold, who's doing that?
So in terms of people who are out in the community, free, going about their own business, when I first started practicing 15 or 16 years ago, before we had all these protections in Colorado, people would get stopped for driving while looking like you're from a different country. Oftentimes in small towns, officers would know who couldn't apply for a driver's license because they didn't have status, and they would keep pulling those people over. So even something as small as being a habitual traffic offender could affect your immigration possibilities down the road of becoming a resident. So there's the enforcement level, and that's where we're really trying to work hard to get people educated so that they don't get to the point where they are detained. So there is a decision to say, I'm gonna send this ICE agent from Glenwood or from Denver up to Leadville to go detain this person, because maybe he was arrested for his or she third DUI, or they're looking for somebody because of that criminal history which is in the system. Where we get worried is sometimes innocent bystanders can be caught up in those situations if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. We've had clients who have talked to ICE agents even though they're looking for somebody else and admitted that maybe they're from El Salvador or Nicaragua. And even so then even if you're not on ICE's radar, you could still be detained at that point. So again, I am worried we're going to see possibly more general raids outside of the, okay, we're coming to this community to arrest this one person who we think is a danger to the public. You know, a couple weeks ago, we heard that ICE went into some factories up in Greeley. So again, if they're on these fishing expeditions and the business owners let the agents in and let them talk to their workers, then that's where we can get into a lot of trouble. Now, once somebody is detained, we strongly advise them to call an experienced immigration lawyer to see if they're eligible for bonds. But ERO is kind of a subsection, there's an officer assigned to each detainee's case. And they could make a decision, potentially, about that person's case. We can advocate for, you know, if this person does have an asylum case, possibly getting that person paroled. If they haven't really, you know, committed any crimes, if they're squeaky clean. Otherwise, we go before an immigration judge to request an immigration bond, which can be anywhere between $2,000 to $20,000. It's not cheap. And sometimes takes a very long time to get a bond hearing, unlike a speedy criminal trial. Our clients are not entitled to that. Our clients are not entitled to a public defender. They have to pay for their lawyers out of pocket. And the federal government actually is trying to shut down the free legal programs through Romaine, which is the Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network, where they were sending a lawyer to the immigration courts here in Colorado to give people information about next steps in their case, which is a really valuable program, especially when you don't speak English.
So there's almost no rhyme or reason to it other than maybe one or two people with some criminal actions could ignite a spark that would start one of these fishing expeditions or something that you're referring to. Like at the ICE level, there's no one really there trying to differentiate between, like they're looking for criminal activities kind of first to spur action, or are they just like?
That is my hope. Over the last couple of administrations, Democrat or Republican, there have been priorities.
Okay.
So typically the top priority are aggravated felons, drug traffickers, people who have harmed other people, whether they're found guilty of, you know, first degree assault, second degree assault. Typically if somebody's serving out a, you know, lengthy sentence, then ICE will just pick them up the day they get released.
But I was gonna say, I wanna chime in on this too, in terms of part of the attempt to protect some of these issues too. I know in the municipal court, and I'm not sure what John Scott's doing upstairs, I would expect he's doing something similar, is to make sure when these folks are brought in on low-level offenses, whether it be DUI or other traffic or low-level shoplifting, you know, misdemeanor type offenses, that part of their advisement when they're arraigned on these charges is to make sure that they understand that the outcome could affect their immigration status. Because one of the things we run into a lot in the low-level courts is that we have prosecutors that like to plead everything out. And the issue, if you do a guilty plea and someone pleads guilty, that goes into the system, that then they have this, you know, this guilty plea on their record. And it could, my concern is that could be something that puts them on a radar for this type of activity.
And in addition to that, that's absolutely correct. This administration has stated that they will go after people who have been in the US for less than 2 years. So January 2023, even if they don't have criminal history. So that's a new priority for this administration.
Wow.
Well, there's also like, he's also trying to go over, I know that it's like legally pretty impossible, but naturalized citizens. So like the messaging is that everyone is at risk. I get that, like, everybody's at different risks. But the messaging seems very like fear-based, that he's trying to keep anyone who has ever immigrated from feeling safe in this country. Are you getting people reaching out who are afraid even though they are natural citizens?
I've had several people reach out to me who are lawful permanent residents, asking if they can lose their green card status.
Yeah.
The answer to that has always been yes, if you commit a serious enough crime, you can go before an immigration judge and they could revoke your green card status. With citizens, for now, the laws remain the same that unless you obtained your citizenship through fraud, i.e. you lied on your immigration applications, you will not lose that status. And Congress would have to change that regulation. So I think, this new administration's throwing a lot at the wall and seeing what will stick. But to go back to your question, the true answer is I don't know. When I first started practicing, a lot of ICE agents that I came into contact with, or my clients came into contact with, and again, this is 16 years ago, they were cowboys. They didn't always follow the same rules that our sheriff's office does when it comes to entering private residences.
This would not be the first federal agency I've heard this about.
So, I don't know what they're capable of over the next year. I personally have had experiences where I wouldn't rely on them to only go after people with serious criminal histories at this point.
And that's like what was sold to voters, and I don't think that's what's, the reality is kind of panning out to be.
No, and we're helping somebody right now who was caught up in a raid in Denver a couple weeks ago, and she's not a gang member, she's a mom. And her husband and kids are scared to death. And that's the reality.
I wonder, on that note, so when we think of our community and if there is a raid or parents are swept up and detained and then eventually deported, but right, so then it falls to the county, Child Welfare and Human Services for the children that are left here, so then what?
Well, I know this isn't a great solution, but having an emergency plan or family plan in place is always a good idea. It's a parent's worst nightmare, but having somebody who the school is able to release the children to, a trusted friend or cousin. And we have, samples of what you can write down and let people know where your family plan is. I get a lot of questions from family law attorneys, and once a parent is deported, we can help advise on guardianships and other legal mechanisms to make sure the kids are taken care of.
Would that be in the best interest of the kids, or wouldn't they reunite with their parents in Mexico? Cause if they're deported, and it'd be really tough to get back, and we're just, I guess, my question is, what's best for the kids?
It's always up to the parents. A lot of times it'll depend on the age of the children. If they're in middle school or high school, a lot of parents will ask a family member to take the kids in and so they can stay here and finish their education. Another big question is it safe for the children where the family member is being deported to? If somebody came here because they were threatened by the dictatorship in Nicaragua and their family's names are on a list of political dissidents, I don't know many parents who'd bring their kids back to that situation. I represented a family where their 6-year-old was shot in Nicaragua, luckily survived, and they were able to get asylum here. Under this administration, if she had just arrived, with less than 2 years here, you know, she may have gotten sent back to Nicaragua before we could win her case. So, we will always do what the parents want. Obviously, if it's a mother and an infant, that infant's probably gonna leave the country with the mother, but I've kind of seen it all, so.
But if there is no family plan, you know, if they aren't in a situation to develop a family plan and there aren't other relatives or whatever, guardianship and stuff to be established, I think it is a real question as to when that situation, you know, the county's human services department becomes aware of that. Are the only options essentially that the child gets into a foster placement or something like that? I mean, that's what I'm visualizing being the outcome of something like that, if that would be.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yes, especially with newly arrived immigrant families or maybe a single parent household, the child could be placed in the system.
It's expensive, it's probably the worst case scenario, especially with the lack of local foster families here that we're, you know, problem we're dealing with, that we're faced with, and hopefully we'll be dealing with by driving up, you know, stepping forward for that at some point, but how could we do like some kind of outreach where it would be like, hey, like, if you're in this at-risk category, you need to have an emergency plan for child placement, like, you need a trusted family friend or family member, like, how do you get that word out to people that, cause without it, you know, it's almost like worst case scenario, with it, it's a less worst case scenario, but it's, you know, at least not the worst.
Well, I think our community partners have been doing their best to reach as many people as possible. Lake County Build a Generation just had an event this week for the immigrant community. St. George's has been working really hard as well. And they're planning an event for later this month. I also work with Mountain Dreamers down in Summit. They're doing a New Year Rights event next week for the community. That's a step that doesn't involve hiring a lawyer, doesn't involve going to court, so I'm hoping people feel confident enough to do it. And we always, you know, advise people who come to us with questions that that's an option. And you know, in terms of children being separated from their parents in this country, that is still happening. A lot of these children are already traumatized if they are fleeing their home country, sometimes on their own. You know, we've had 12-year-olds come to the border seeking asylum, 11-year-olds, 10-year-olds. They're placed in albergues, which is sort of like a home on the border until they can be reunited with a family member up here in Colorado. And that can sometimes take 3 to 4 weeks. So our tax dollars are being spent on that and have been, as well as all the increased detentions. There was a study a few years back where it was well over $300 a day to keep a person down in Geo Aurora. I imagine with inflation now it's closer to $400 a day. Multiply that by close to 2,000. So yeah, I mean,
There's a lot.
if we have to house children who are torn away from their parents in our communities, I think that's gonna be a drop in the bucket compared to the big picture. That's still tragic.
Would you be able to speak to law enforcement liability, especially in Colorado, when it comes to working with immigration and customs enforcement?
That might be a better question for our local cops, but I can say that ICE will notify them when they're coming into the community, again with hopefully a judicial warrant, but not always. Because they want, you know, they want them to sometimes be available or be on site should there be a dangerous situation, a hostage situation. You know, if they're coming to capture somebody maybe known to have weapons, very common in this town. So yes, our local law enforcement has been called out to essentially assist with ICE operations. That doesn't mean they're the ones actually detaining the individual or making, I suppose, the key decisions in terms of liability. But again, if something does go down, I think they're there to help protect the community.
Right, and that's my communications with Sheriff Speckman, and I shared your graph so that he can share it with his officer too, to make sure they understand, you know, his deputies that understand the difference between these. It's my understanding from Sheriff Speckman that they are not going to be cooperating with the civil detention. If there's somebody, and we've had this come up now a couple of times already, somebody being detained on low-level offenses, if they're able to bond out, they have to let them bond out. There's no, under those civil detention orders, no obligation for law enforcement to detain that person beyond it, and if they do, that is a violation of their civil rights, and it could expose them to potential liability for that.
So our local Colorado law enforcement can cooperate with ICE to the point of, not to the point of detaining someone.
Beyond the time when they would be otherwise eligible for release.
So Chris is referring to, let's say somebody gets arrested for a DUI.
Right.
On
You can't hold
a
them for
Friday
ICE.
night, if they're able to bond out before ICE picks up that they're incarcerated, and again, this gets more serious with subsequent DUIs. It's extremely serious for immigration. If ICE does not arrive here before that person posts bond, then our local law enforcement should release them immediately and not have an ICE hold, which they used to do in the past.
But they can contact ICE to say, hey, we have this person.
They're not
Get here
obligated
in
to.
time.
They can,
Yes.
it's a judgment call.
It is.
Yeah, I'm just wondering where the legal, I'm trying to understand, especially since they're county employees, where their legal liability lies and how Colorado as like a place where we don't cooperate with ICE. It's like, actually we do, but where are the lines? That's what I'm hoping to have a little more gleaning from you.
I don't want to speak for the sheriff's office.
No, of course
I
not.
don't know if they have a bright line where if somebody is arrested for, let's say, first-degree felony and they have a significant record already, then they may contact ICE.
Yeah.
I don't know where they draw that line though, I'm not really sure. Again, if somebody is, you know, a known sexual predator has been found guilty of sexual assaults, rape, I don't represent those people, they never get to me.
Right, I get that, okay.
There's
So this isn't something
absolutely
you could
nothing I can do, there's no defense under immigration law that would keep certain people in this country, so I imagine they may be reaching out to ICE with very significant criminal history.
Totally. I know that they've done that, I'm just trying to understand the law around it, and maybe you can't speak to that, which I respect, but I was just wondering if you could.
Well, I mean, in terms of the, you know, what the new guidance that has been issued by the administration in the last week or so, is that it authorizes the ICE agents to go into spaces they were previously denied access to. And it essentially allows local law enforcement to cooperate with them, but there is an affirmative obligation with ICE to inform and collaborate, that's what they call it, collaborate with local law enforcement in terms of enforcing immigration orders and such. But there's no obligation to, and under, you know, Colorado law, again, there are some protections there that if local law enforcement violates, then they have the potential to. So
Right, those are the pieces I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
And, because then it also opens up not only the sheriff's department, but the county
The
to
county.
liability.
And it's a civil rights claim, so it's a
Right.
civil claim against the county, and it will be against the county.
Right,
And in most instances, it will name the sheriff, and it will name the county as well. So there is that liability risk, and I've had that conversation with the sheriff, and he has been absolutely that if it is a criminal situation though, and that he is going to enforce the law, the criminal law, but that he has issued orders to his staff to not voluntarily cooperate with the cities. Because we do not want to create that potential for liability, and I'm sorry, I wish he could have been here today, because it'd been good to have him as a part of this conversation too.
yeah,
But anyway,
I mean, I have a lot of faith that they will make the right decisions and not hold up the county out to any claims. We're not in Arizona.
or other parts of Colorado.
I don't think our folks up here have that reputation of crossing any lines. They're smart, they're all well trained, albeit a small force. And I imagine they may come to Chris if there are any gray areas for advice.
That's what I've encouraged, and the sheriff is committed to that when time allows. So if he's in an emergent situation, there may not be time to have that consultation, but
Right.
where there is the opportunity, he is committed to that.
You know, for as long as this has been such a complex problem, and why is the immigration process still so convoluted, difficult, expensive? Why is it so hard for people who wanna be here, be productive members of society, be safer than where they came from, etc.? Why is it so hard to get these people status?
That's a really good question. I oftentimes compare our immigration office to the IRS, because they're both federal agencies that are completely overwhelmed with work, with applications, with rules that change between administrations. But to throw on top of that, the immigration court system, which is not as efficiently or well-run as our criminal court system for a number of reasons. We don't have enough judges. They're not always as well selected as our local judges. I mean, I think after having done this for 15 years, I could probably go in and fix a lot of things in our immigration system. But our, Attorney General is always changing, and that person doesn't have an immigration law background. So a lot of these decisions are being made by politicians. It's a story as old as time, right? People making huge decisions that affect the country that maybe get a short memo on it. They haven't spent their whole lives dedicated to working for justice or for the people. So I guess I don't know. I think it would be a boon to our economy if we let more people adjust their status, meaning get a green card the right way. Meaning having laws that are less draconian, and a lot fewer, I guess, punishments for people who cross the border without a visa, maybe when they're only 2 years old. So I think, I don't know, I think throughout my lifetime, I've always heard about the DREAM Act. It seems like 85% of this country supports it. Why haven't we passed it? I'm not a member of Congress, so I don't know. But if people want to make more money, we could charge immigrants a lot of money in filing fees to submit applications and get people social security cards and get kids into college more easily in some states. Not everywhere is like Colorado where we do in-state tuition for undocumented folks. So yeah, there's a lot of really small steps we could take to make it a better system. So if any of you want to run for Congress and change some federal regulations, I'll tell you how to do it, but
Run for Congress or change the
Change
regulations?
it, it needs to be changed. Any other final questions for Karen? I wanna be respectful of everybody's time.
And then also just there's so much misinformation out there and assumptions. It is a complicated system, and it's unfortunate that you need to pay lawyers quite a bit of money to do what should be more simple. I wish we had less work, because I wish it was an easier system to navigate.
Yeah, I hear stories of people spending like $50,000 or something to figure out their status or go, from A to Z. By the time they're all the way through, they're spending insane amounts of money to make this thing happen.
Are you, do you charge by the hour or by the case?
Typically hourly billing. If we are working with a nonprofit to get a grant for somebody, then we may do just a flat fee for whatever they're willing to, sponsor the person for. We do that quite a bit with DACA renewals, and U-Visa cases as well.
Is it easier to get a green card if you came on a tourist visa versus sneaking into the country?
Generally, yes, that will open up more options because it's a lawful entry. You still need to have somebody petition or sponsor you. But yes, if you.
And what, like an employer or a friend or an American citizen? I don't understand. Can you expand on that sponsorship?
A friend cannot sponsor a friend. I wish that were the case. So it usually has to be an immediate relative family petition, so parent, spouse, child, sibling. Employment-based visas and employment-based green cards are a little bit more rare in my line of work because we're typically helping people who are already here. On the off chance that somebody came here on a visa and has been able to renew their visa or switch statuses, like student, worker, and they have not fallen out of status, then yes, potentially we could help them with a business sponsoring them. But then they have to go through the Department of Labor to show that that specific position can only be filled by an immigrant. So we really have to tailor the application to the applicant, which is why it can be really challenging for just our local businesses to sponsor somebody. We have to put out an ad, and if even one US citizen or resident is qualified for the job, then we can't get the Department of Labor certification. So our country makes it difficult. We do have a little loophole for people who wanna come to the US, open a business, invest $1 million or $500,000 and hire 10 US citizens to work there. So if you're extremely wealthy, you might have that option.
Sure, come on in.
My clients typically don't have that option, but I didn't go into business to help those people. I got into business to help people who are oftentimes victims of serious human rights violations in their home country.
I know it's 11 o'clock, but just really quickly, it's wonderful to be able to talk to you. I really appreciate your time. And as 3 new commissioners especially, do you have any advice to us or entreaties to make to a county? How can we best make this an easier process or protect our community better from our position?
I had a feeling you were going to ask me that.
Good, okay.
And, I think having your voices heard as leaders who are respected in our community, and again, just taking the line of, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but, sane policies, discussions. I think a lot of people in our community are jumping to one side or the other of a lot of issues, not just immigration. But I think bringing, intelligent conversations back to government, making sure that people are being respectful during community events and not spreading bad information is really important. I was actually really sick for a couple of meetings around the sanctuary city, but people have a right to their opinions, but a lot of these opinions are severely misinformed. So sticking to facts, truth, reality. The reality is that I think we can, again, support immigration actions that keep our communities safe. I fear that we will continue to see immigration actions that violate civil liberties, that hurt our friends and family, and that they'll never recover from. I'm terrified of having to look at the next kid in the eye and saying, "You're not gonna be able to see your dad. He's leaving tomorrow on a plane," which I had to do a lot of at the beginning of my career. Sorry. And also I'm pregnant, so I'm a little hormonal.
That's okay.
So yeah, just keeping that in mind. When we have community events where people just pigeonhole immigrants as hurting our communities, you all know that's not the truth. We wouldn't survive without them. And I fear that over the next year, our economy will also make that very clear. So even if you don't care about the human rights issues, we're gonna see problems if we try to deport all of the hardworking people from Colorado and our surrounding states.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Really appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you. It's been a tough few weeks. We've gotten through some rough times in immigration history, and we do need some really smart reforms. But, just having you all give me the opportunity to talk about this is really great, and I think you can do a lot of powerful things.
It's wonderful you gave us your time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm gonna email this to you, just so you'll have it for reference, and if you do look at the graph and have questions, feel free to let me know. If I can't answer it, I'll get with Karen and see if we can answer it together or something like that, so
Thank you.
anyway, appreciate the opportunity. Karen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Allowing us to, and your work in our community, it does not go unnoticed, so.
Well, I feel bad that we don't really advertise just because we're so busy, but yeah, you're welcome to let people know we're here, and I'm happy to go down to any place that ICE shows up. And in other states, they're starting to show up at schools.
Do you,
So-
I've got a hint, do you by chance have any of those cards still left that you were giving out to folks that if they know somebody who is concerned, it's a business size type card that has in English on one side and Spanish on the other as to what they're writing, even if you just have one that you can give to each of it, just so you have an idea of what you can provide to them.
So, yeah, we had these printed a while ago after the election, just in case. 'Cause a lot of people get really scared when somebody who is wearing all black and armed comes around, so a lot of times we'll say, just don't say anything and hand them these cards. Basically pretend you're mute, if nothing else, so you don't incriminate yourself in terms of violating any immigration laws.
Thanks again for the time.
Thanks for having me.
You're beautiful, thank you.
Congratulations on your
Yes, your
New
second
family.
coming.
Thank you.
number.
Yep, well, If anyone has any parenting advice, I'll call you. When I've
Don't
had
give 'em a
people do
phone.
it.
Don't give them
Don't give 'em a phone.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, I think, commissioners, that was our only,
All right,
item on
thank
this
you.
agenda, so it's up to
Alright,
you.
yeah, it's 11:06 AM. We're going to end this work session of the Lake County Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you.
Oh,
You can
yeah.
drop this. I haven't had that tutorial yet, so thank you so much. Hey, Tim said you wanted to check me about it. I'll just see if they have it.
So yeah.
Chris, I have an update